Hello, I'm Hemang, and this is my presentation for my web dev midterm. And today we are going to be building an application, and also we are going to be learning how to build an application with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Express, Node, and Mongo as we keep building the application. So the big picture is the front end consists of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The backend is Node.js with Express, and the database is going to be MongoDB. So to understand all this, let's look at a quick data flow. So say we are creating a quick Notes app. So the user types in the note in the interface, which is going to be the HTML. The JavaScript is something that would capture the input and create a post request to the Express server, and Express saves it to MongoDB and sends a response back to the front end for the UI to update. So what is HTML? So HTML is short for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is the skeleton of every web page. It defines the structure and content. It's basically what appears on the page. Think of it like building a house. HTML is the frame and walls. It's not about how it looks yet. That's where CSS would come in. And HTML just says here's a heading, here's a paragraph, here's a button, so on and so forth. HTML uses tags to define elements. Things like forms, inputs, buttons, divs. These tags can have attributes like ID, class, or placeholders that give them extra information. Now let me show you HTML in action. So every HTML document starts with a doc type and then a HTML tag. The head contains metadata and the body is where our visible content goes. So here are a few metadata that I have pre-written, and this is a title. So title is basically something that appears on the tab. So this could be some information about the page, and basically the link tags you can use to link your external style sheets or even your favicons. Now let's understand how we can create elements in HTML. So HTML has header tags. It ranges from H1 to H6, and we create them something like this. Okay, cool. So this is how it would look on our front end. So we also have a paragraph tag that allows us to create paragraphs. So let's say hello world, and this would create paragraphs for us. So creating a list is just as simple as this. We use the tag UL, which stands for unordered list, and we use the tag LI to add an item inside, which basically stands for list item. Cool. So this is how it will look like. So you could add multiple list items, something like this, and this would add multiple list items as well. So there are something called anchor tags in HTML, which we use to link external links, which are basically hyperlinks in our website. So to create a hyperlink using anchor tags, we use something like this. And to add a link to this, we use the term href, and we add the link inside that. And this would create something like this. So when we click on it, it will take us to the link that we have. So this could be a file in your website, this could be another page in your website, or just anything else in the website. This could also be tags, which we could use to reference other IDs in the websites section as well. So HTML5 actually gives us semantic elements like header, nav, main, and footer. They describe their purpose, and this is something we commonly use. So this is an example of a semantic element. So We have header, nav, main, and footer, and we use this to understand how a website is built. So now let me quickly clean this up and create a basic template to understand how a Notes application would work. Okay, so here I have a quick sample of what I built for our Notes app. So to explain something about this, we have a form. So a form consists of elements that we would have, which we can use to submit. There's an input for the title, a text area for content, and if you notice it's bigger than the input. There's a button to submit, and I've created a div here which we will use in future to populate with our JavaScript. Now we have a HTML structure which looks pretty plain. Here's where CSS would come eh, to help. If the HTML is the skeleton, CSS is like the skin. CSS controls everything visual, colors, fonts, spacing, layouts, and animations. So CSS uses selectors to target HTML elements and then applies properties to style them. Let me show you how powerful CSS is. So let me create a style section to show you how the CSS would work and a few fundamental CSS concepts. So I've already created a style CSS file, and CSS has three main types of selectors: element, class, and ID selectors. So the element selectors targets tag like h1, p, div, so on and so forth. So a to create an element selector, we just type in the element name and add some style to it, something like this. So this would change the particular element's style. So creating a class selector is pretty easy as well. So you add a dot followed by the name of the class, so something like this, and we could add in the properties as well. So we could say the color is, say, brown, and that would change uh, the the element that has the particular class with it. And the ID selectors start with a hashtag. So it's pretty simple to create. So we do hashtag followed by the ID's name. So let's say we are changing this style. So let's say something like this, and let's say something like this. This would change the value of that particular ID. Okay, so something that's way more important that I wanted to talk about in this video is basically the box model layout, which is pretty important to understand how CSS works. So every HTML element is a box, and imagine this as a div. So the content is what the actual content, whatever is there, and let's understand what padding is. So padding is basically the space inside the container. So if you have to change the value of whatever is there inside, I mean like the space inside the container, this is where we would use padding. And let's understand what margin is. So margin is basically the space outside the container. If you want to increase or decrease the space outside the container, that's where margin comes to play. And to to modify the edge of the box, we use border, which is also very commonly used. CSS has flexbox and grids. Flexbox is great for arranging items in rows or columns with spacing. So let me teach something very interesting in Flexbox. Say you want to create a div, okay, and you want to create another div right in the center of this particular div. So the way we can do this is pretty simple. So we should make sure the display is set to flex, and then we should make sure the position is set to justify content, and align items to center. This will make sure the div here is actually placed in the center of the parent div. Okay, so now I have added a few styles uh, to our existing Node app to make it look a little better. And now writing all this CSS can be tedious and time consuming. What if I told you there's a faster way? This is where Bootstrap comes in. Say CSS framework with pre-written styles, and instead of writing 50 lines of code, you could just add class names and develop quick and easy UI solutions. It's not really recommended if you have to design a very custom solution, but it's a pretty quick way to give styles to the elements and build a quick interface without using a lot of code. So this is a design I created with manual CSS, and let's see how easy it is to create with Bootstrap. So this is how it is to create with a Bootstrap, and if you can see, I do not have my CSS linked here in the new updated version that I'm showing right now, and we have a pretty decent UI with no CSS written and just adding class names from Bootstrap. So creating these class names are also pretty easy and interesting as well. So Bootstrap uses class names like container, card, form control, BTN primary, and so on. And Bootstrap handles spacing, colors, responsiveness automatically. And this would help us in creating a prototype very fast. Okay, now we have the structure with HTML and styling with CSS. Our app doesn't do anything yet, and that's where JavaScript comes in. JavaScript is a programming language that runs in the browser. It's what makes the web page interactive and dynamic. If HTML is the skeleton and CSS is the skin, JavaScript is the brain and muscle. It makes things move, respond to clicks, update the content, communicate with servers, and a lot more. JavaScript has three key abilities we use: DOM manipulation, event handling, and the fetch API. So DOM manipulation is basically changing what's on the page. Event handling basically is something that responds to button clicks and so on and so forth. Fetch API is basically used to communicate with the backend servers. Okay, let's quickly understand the fundamentals of JavaScript before hopping in deep. So creating a variable in JavaScript is pretty simple. Unlike other programming languages, you don't have to specify a data type. You just use the keywords let or const. Var is also something that was previously used in JavaScript, but not anymore. So to create a quick variable, all you have to do is just type in let or const, and const is something with which you can change the value later, so it's a read-only variable, and let allows you to modify the variable in the future. So we are going to be using let for now, and let's say let title equals notes app. So this is how easy it is to create a variable in JavaScript. So there are data types in JavaScript, we just don't define them. And we have a number, which is basically anything that's number, int, long int, float, or whatever. If there's a number, it comes under the number data type. So let's say let number equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. So we have boolean, we'll say that flag equals true. We have boolean. We have objects, which is very important when we do web development. And objects are pretty easy to understand and create as well. So let's say let database equals, let's say name as a1 and age 25. So this is how we would create an object. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is how we would create an object, and it's pretty simple to understand as well. And this is something like a dictionary if you are very familiar with Python. And this is very commonly used in JavaScript for communicating with the database. And we have functions. Creating a function is pretty easy and simple. You just use the term function followed by the function's name, and that's it. This is a quick, easy boilerplate for a function. And there are conditionals just like other programming languages. It's pretty straightforward. You just do if, else, else if, and so on and so forth. It's the same. And the while loop, do while are all the same. For loop is same as well. So we just do for, and we have the loop inside, and it's pretty straightforward and same as any other programming language as well. Now let's quickly jump to our uh, website to understand how to do DOM manipulation and change the values in JavaScript. Okay, so I have a quick set of code here to help us understand how DOM manipulation works. So the DOM is basically document object model, and that is how JavaScript sees the HTML page as a tree of objects. We can select elements, change content, modify styles, add or remove classes, and create new elements. And we select elements using get element by ID or a query selector. We change the content with the text content or inner HTML. The styles are modified with the style property. The classes are added or removed with the class list property. And we create new elements with create element and append child. So this is the power of JavaScript to dynamically update web pages without reloading them. Let's understand event handling. Say I have a function handle click, and I have an alert inside, and I want this button on click to respond to this. So what I would do is I would first create a variable, say button, and I would say document, and first we're going to be selecting it by ID. So get element by ID, and I'm gonna add the ID of that particular button in here, and that's going to be add node btn. And we are going to be adding button dot add event listener, and we're going to pair it with click, and we're going to say what function we are pairing it with. I'm going to say handle click. And this will let us bind the function just like this. So some common events other than click are submit to handle form submissions, key press to handle keyboard inputs, and mouse over to handle the hovering. So let's understand arrays as well, which is because it would be very helpful for us to handle data in the front end as well as in the back end as well. So let's create a variable called nodes, uh, and let's initialize it to an empty array, and let's push some value to nodes. So let's say nodes dot push would push an item to the array, and let's add an object inside. Let's say I'm sorry, title is going to be a sample node. That's good. And let's say content as this is a sample node. That looks good. And now we would have this object inside this nodes variable. And to check if it has worked, uh, let's also understand how we can take the items one by one. And let me let me do a for loop. So let's say nodes dot for each. So for each is another way we could do instead of the traditional for loop. So function node. Okay, I think this should work. And let me add some data inside to understand that it is indeed pushing the values, and let's see in our console. So if we can see both the values have been console, and we can understand this is how we can manipulate objects in an array in JavaScript. Okay, so let's clean this up and write some functions for our Notes app. So now I have a set of functions here for our Note app. So the add node handles uh, when the button is clicked, and it handles the input values and validates that they are not empty, creates a node object and adds it to a nodes array and calls the display nodes to update the UI. And pretty much the display nodes method gets the nodes list and clears it with the inner HTML equals an empty code, and loops to the nodes array, and for each node creates a card and appends it to the page. So let's check if our software is working. Let me say test, uh, and let's click on add, and we can see our new node being created here. So now we have a fully functional front end. It looks good and works, but it's not persistent. To save nodes permanently and access them from anywhere, we need a backend server. If you look at the website that we did right now, if we refresh, the state is lost. So we don't have a permanent storage, and that's where we would use Mongo and Express. So Node.js lets us run JavaScript on a server. Express is the framework that makes building APIs easy. But first, let me explain a fundamental concept in web development, which is CRUD and HTTP methods. So CRUD pretty much stands for create, read, update, and delete. Create, read, update, and delete. So we will actually perform HTTP methods like post, get, put, and delete to handle all these methods. So post or create is basically to create a file, get is to read, put is to edit, delete is to remove the file. Okay, so I have already set up my backend, but to set up a backend, it's pretty simple and easy. So all you need to run on your terminal is npm init, and this is going to be creating a list of uh, necessary files to get started with your npm server. And we do npm install express to install express, and we could also install cars for the front end to be able to read from the back end as well. Okay, so let's start by building a quick express server and understand how express works. So we import express by using import, and let's import cars as well. Okay, cool. So let's say app equals express, and let's use the express as well. So let's do app.use express.json, and let's do app.use cars. Now let's start the server by using app.listen 3000, and let's say the console is running on localhost 3000. So this would help us get started with our express server. Now let's add routes to understand how to create a route. So we would create a get route using this app.get, and this would create in the like the root route, and let's send a response that says hello world. And we could create a post request with something like this, followed by a function with which we can write anything that's important or that's needed depending on the post request. And we could create put with app.put, and similarly we do delete with app.delete. Okay, so now I've created a Notes API for our Notes application, and I've created post, get, put, and delete to create a note, update the note, and delete the note as well. Now we will have to change the script file in our front end to handle these requests. So currently the front end is still working on the existing code that's basically from the uh, notes variable that we have created here. So now we will create a fetch request to get the values from the server and use it in our front end. So now let's create a function called fetch nodes. Okay, awesome. So this fetch nodes will basically create a fetch request to get the nodes, and let me create a variable inside called response, and I do a fetch. So we are going to be doing await fetch. Let me make this an asynchronous function. Okay, await. Oh my god. Okay, so let's say await fetch, and let's give in the URL to fetch inside here. So that's going to be localhost 3000, and next let's say nodes is equal to await, like await response.json, and let's call display nodes. I'm not doing a lot of error handling here because this is just for us to understand how it works. But it's always better to use try, catch, and promises to make sure the data is received and the errors are handled gracefully. And right now we don't have our backend running as well, which is pretty simple to do. So to start a backend, we do nerd followed by the file name, and this would start our backend. And let's continue working on our fetch here. So let me call fetch nodes here. Okay. Okay. So now we have configured our fetch nodes. Let's configure our add node to add a data, that is create a post request to the server to add a node. So this is going to be pretty simple, just like how we did before. So we are going to be creating another variable here, and let's say const response equals await fetch, and that's it. Okay, so this is how we usually call a get request, but to specify if it's a post request, we add a comma here followed by curly braces, and we say method as post. We could add in the standard headers, or if any header is required. And okay, I'm sorry, if any headers are required, and we would attach the body to the post request, something like this. And we would say I want to send in the title and the content. So when we send this, we always have to send it as a string, and that's why we would use json.stringify to parse it as a string and send it to the backend. Okay, so now, okay, so let me switch this to an asynchronous function. Okay, so now that we have our response variable completed, we'll need to set the value to the response, whatever we are getting. Okay, so now that we have our response done, let's let's try to add the value that we get from the response to the front end. And this is pretty simple. So let's create a variable, and let's name it created. Let's say response.json. Cool. And let me say nodes.push created. And let me add in the URL here, localhost 3000/nodes. Okay, so now this would make sure that the response is properly created and a node would be created. Okay, so now we have successfully created and pushed the value to our backend. Let's test it out on the front end if it works fine. So let's create a quick note here. Let's call it test as well. And let's add in a node, and let's click on add node, and we can see a new node created here. And we verify that this node is on the backend by trying to refresh it, and as if we can see, the state is preserved, but the state is really not preserved. So we are still storing the value in an array in the backend, so if the server restarts, we lose all our data. So this is where MongoDB comes to play. So MongoDB is a NoSQL database, and let me explain what that means. So traditional SQL database like MySQL or PostgreSQL store data in tables with rows and columns, whereas NoSQL database like MongoDB is structured entirely different. It's an unstructured database, and we store data in collection and documents. It's flexible, and the document looks like JSON objects, so it's pretty perfect for our JavaScript applications. So MongoDB has three core concepts: database, collection, and document. So database is a container for collections. So it's something like Notes app. Collections are basically a group of documents like the notes, and document are the individual records. That's one particular node. So I am going to be using MongoDB Atlas. So it's MongoDB's cloud-based service, and it's free to start. And you could use Atlas as well, or you could set up Mongo on your local system. But we are not going to be using Mongoose, which is basically a library, and Mongoose actually considers MongoDB as a structured database, which is not something we would want for this particular session, and we will be using DB's default drivers. Okay, cool. Let's look at some programming examples. So since we don't have a lot of time left, I have pre-configured the MongoDB for our server, and let's go through what happens where. So let's look at a post request. So the post request we previously created, now we use the insert one from MongoDB to insert a data to the collection. The get to get a data, we use the dot find to get the data from Mongo from the collection, and similarly we get a specific item just like this with the find one, where we say the ID is whatever the ID we are getting from the request, and similarly we edit and delete with delete one and find one and update respectively. So this is a quick overview of how Mongo can be configured to our website, and it's pretty easy to understand and implement as well. So I have hard coded the Mongo uh, URI here, but what you could do is use environmental variables to get from the environmental variables, which is a very good common practice used by enterprise grade software. But just for demonstration purposes, I've used a fixed constant variable with the string here, and we would drop in a MongoDB URI right in here. Hosting a Node.js application is very simple. So we could use websites like onrender.com. So this is a website that I commonly use to host a Node.js application, and it's easy to use as well. So we would have to upload our code to Git and add the Git project on onrender, and it would automatically take care of the rest and host an application for us. And before winding it up, I wanted to go through quickly about what all we have learned throughout this session and what all we have actually covered throughout our HTML course till our midterm. We have started to learn with, that is HTML. So we have covered what an element is and what are IDs, what are classes, what a box model is, what goes under the head and the body of HTML. We learned about headers, which varies from H1 to H6. And something that's very important about this is one HTML file can contain only one single H1 tag and now multiple, even though HTML accepts it. we need to have only one header tag. So we understood about the semantic elements like uh, footer, header, article, section, etc., etc. We went through what a list is and how to create a list. So UL stands for unordered list and LI stands for list item. We saw what forms were and how to create forms and how forms work as well. So let's talk about CSS. So we saw what inline style is, what a selector is, and how to create uh, styles. And we saw what flexbox is, and also how to use grids as well. And something that's important about CSS is we never use important in CSS. We only use if we are stuck and if we have to debug what's wrong, but we don't use important anywhere in our CSS. And we learn about pseudo classes and CSS preprocessors. We also learned about Bootstrap and how we could quickly use Bootstrap and why we should and should not use Bootstrap as well. Let's take a look about JavaScript. We learned about how to create a script and how to add that to our HTML page. We saw what a function was. We saw about the data types, strings, boolean, numbers, objects, and so on. Uh, we saw about the actual data types in JavaScript as such as const and let, and we should pretty much always avoid var. So we saw about map, set, async and await, asynchronous and await, promises, and uh, we saw how to use ES6 modules with imports and exports. We learned how to configure package.json. And we learned about npm. We learned about node, JSON, and some regular expressions as well. So we also learned about ESLint and why it is important to use ESLint and Prettier. Okay, so there are two types of architectures we saw. So we saw a two-tier architecture and a three-tier architecture. So a two-tier architecture is basically just a front end, and a three-tier architecture is with Node or Express, Mongo, and the front end. And under Mongo, we also learned that we have a MongoDB document and a Mongo server. So the Mongo server could be hosted on your computer or on the cloud. So we learned about Mongo query language and we learned about the queries like limit, skip, sort, project, and more. So we learned a few aggregation pipelines like group by, filter, and join. So for Node and Express, we learned about routes, we learned about data endpoints, all the HTTP protocol like GET, POST, PUT, and delete, and about regular expressions as well. Okay, so these are some of the topics that we have covered within the first few sessions of our class. And with this, we have a good understanding of developing a full-fledged web application, including the backend, front end, and the CSS and database as well. So this is it for this presentation, and I have covered all the topics related to HTML, and we've built our quick application to create our notes as well. Thank you.